Hello, and welcome to another edition of our Reading the Signs podcast, where we examine various religious, cultural, public policy issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm Rick Hinshaw. I've had a career of more than 30 years in Catholic communications. With me, Dr. Jim Dolan, who's had a 46-year career in behavioral health programs. Today, we're going to talk about the latest encyclical from Pope Leo, Magnificat Humanitas, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Magnificent humanity.
That's the English translation. Thank you, Jim. And what the Pope is dealing with here is the question of artificial intelligence, a very vital and current topic. And the Holy Father, as might be expected, is looking at both the potential for positive good, how AI can be used in service to humanity, and dangerous ways in which the use of artificial intelligence can be dehumanizing, a threat to humanity. And he cites two biblical images to illustrate this point. The first one, the Tower of Babel from Genesis, in which really a godless endeavor descended into chaos. And then he looks at the rebuilding of Jerusalem in Nehemiah, in which Nehemiah first prays and fasts for God's help in rebuilding Jerusalem when he returned from exile. And he pulls the people together and they endeavor to rebuild the city with the help of God, with God's blessing. And that's much more successful. So the Holy Father looks at how AI has the same type of positive and negative potential, and he suggests that we look at it and its potential through the lens of Catholic social teaching. And very quickly, he lists the principles of Catholic social teaching, the principle of the common good, that we need to look at things not just in how they benefit or affect us individually, but how they impact on the common good of all. The principle of the universal destination of goods, that while the church upholds the right to private property, we recognize that all of God's creation has been put on this earth for the good of all humanity, and all need to have access to it. The principle of subsidiarity, that in addressing human concerns, issues of human suffering, human need, they be addressed as close as possible to the victims or those affected by the problem. So beginning with families, communities, churches, government at the local level, rather than dealing with everyone's particular issues in a large national or international bureaucratic way, a way that can touch people individually because it's close to them. Connected to that, the principle of solidarity, that we're all in this together and that we need to work together as the people in Jerusalem did with Nehemiah in rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, working together in solidarity with each other. And finally, the principle of social justice, the idea that we give special attention to the needs of the poor and the disadvantaged, what Pope St. John Paul called a preferential option for the poor. So the Pope is suggesting that, as with so many matters, we look at the question of AI through the lens of this Catholic social teaching. Jim, all that being said as an intro, what jumps out at you in this encyclical?
What jumped out at me initially, Rick, as it did jump out to me on with regard to the Pope's speech to the diplomatic corps, that the number of issues that he raises in his presentations is staggering. To me, there were about 14 different concepts he touched on. And of course, it stems to a large extent related to his concerns about artificial intelligence and its potential impact. He touches on the potential impact largely to the extent that it could be a negative for us. But so these concepts about how we should manage this power that comes from AI is to me, again, it's just a concept. What's most important is, how do we operationalize those ideas? How do we put those ideas, those principles into practice in the everyday? to me, the way to operationalize it, the way to bring it to life in the everyday, the way to bring it home so that you can implement it in the moment to moment of life is to view each person we encounter as a member of our family. Jesus oftentimes refers to as the family and the father, and he uses the concept of family to help us to understand how we should relate to one another. We shouldn't be viewing one another as potential enemies, as strangers to be on guard against, that we are all brothers and sisters. So I just want to tell a little story. Also, with regard to AI, he warns and cautions about the potential to profile people based on what has transpired and what the technological world knows about them up until a particular moment. But early in my career, I was new to administration, and I worked in a branch office. And we used to receive tickets to take people with serious mental illness, people who had been in state hospitals, state psychiatric centers for decades. And we used to get bunches of tickets to take this patient population to cultural events in New York City. And on one occasion, the van driver, I'll use the name Bill, he took about seven, eight, nine of our patients, we called them clients back then, to New York City. He dropped them off at the event, and then he went to go get something to eat. And he didn't exactly park his car legally when he ran into the deli, I think it was. He comes back out, and the car is gone. The van is gone. The van is gone. And so he reports this to me, and I'm like, holy smokes. And within an instant, the main office found out about it. And this is back in the early 1980s. And the big shot from the main office comes to me. He has the parking ticket, the towing ticket, the overnight ticket cost to store the vehicle. It came to hundreds of dollars. This is back in the early 1980s. And this big shot from the main office just says to me, "You tell you tell Bill that this is on him." And I was a good little soldier, and I just marched right over. I called Bill into my office, and I just handed these three bills to Bill. And Bill was a guy I worked in South Jamaica. Bill was a guy from the neighborhood. And if you looked at Bill's profile, you would think this is probably his first regular job. He's probably been a screw up in various jobs in his life. And he's probably somebody we should be looking to get rid of.
Hmm.
And this will be the impetus to get rid of him. And he's going to know when Bill is told, you have the responsibility for covering these costs, Bill, he's going to know that he can't handle it and he's in deep, deep trouble. So this is what happened. I handed these documents to Bill. He holds them in his hand. He's just holding them like this. And he starts to cry. Tears are coming down his face. And I said to myself, holy smokes, what did I do? What did I do? I grabbed them. I grabbed those three bills from Bill. Give me those bills. Holy smokes. So the next day I marched back to this big shot from the main office. I said, Bill's not handling these. We could absorb this. I'm going to vouch for Bill. So what the Pope emphasizes to a large extent is that we should be viewing life, viewing humanity, viewing the moment to moment from the eyes of the victim, from the eyes of the vulnerable, from the eyes of the person who has the ability to change. AI can't take that into account, a person's ability to change. They can't take into account forgiveness. They can't take into account the magnificent humanity, how we can be Jesus in the present. We can channel Jesus into those moments. AI cannot do that. So we have to look at each other. We have to treat each other as if, and at that moment, I saw Bill as my brother. I wouldn't have done that to my biological brother. I wouldn't have expected them to do it to me, and I certainly wasn't going to do it to Bill. So that was to a large extent what I took in from the Pope's talk. But the Pope touches on, like I said, 14 different concepts, and I have to, just as a little aside, because this is fresh in my memory. And sometimes we all might wonder, so what gives the Pope the right to think that what he says should carry a lot of weight? What gives him the belief that what he is saying has credibility? Why is he, in his mind and in the church's mind, should be one with such authority? Well, the truth is that what we Christians say, the things that we Christians do permeate society. They do have an impact, and we don't necessarily get the credit, but the things that the Pope is saying about how we have to care for one another, how we should be protective of people's work, how the importance of work, and how we should provide for people's work. But the other point the Pope makes, and I know I'm going on a long while here, that the Pope emphasizes that humanness, individuals, their worth doesn't come from their ability to produce. Their worth doesn't come from their ability to be efficient. It comes from them being a child of God. That's where their worth emanates from. So we should be taking extraordinary steps to protect people's employment. But anyway, so I had to take a defensive driver course to lower my driver insurance because my driver's auto insurance is going through the roof. So I could take a defensive driver's course. And one of the things they say is, well, how to handle the aggressive driver that you will inevitably encounter on the road. What do you do about that? I was shocked. You know what they say in that training? They say, in response to the aggressive driver, be tolerant and forgiving. I was like, what? You mean you don't blare your horn at him? You don't, you be tolerant and forgiving. That kind of stuff comes from Christianity.
Well, yeah, the thing is that the church and all religions have a role to play, and you're right. Oftentimes, it's met with hostility from the public, or certainly from various influencers in our culture, who feel that people's religious faiths should be relegated to their private houses of worship or their prayer life at home in private. But the fact of the matter is, and really every movement against injustice, every movement for equality, for justice that has been successful, I think, throughout history, has always had a component of religious input into it. Certainly, the abolitionist movement in our own
Yeah.
country, the movement against apartheid, the struggle against international communism and its enslavement of whole populations, the leadership of St. John Paul in that was invaluable. So the church has a responsibility, and that's what the Pope is saying here, to be a moral voice in how AI develops, in how it is used, and whether or not it is used for good or for evil. Now, your example of uh, that man in your employ and that very difficult situation brings up for me a very interesting exchange, not direct exchange between them, but exchange in terms of different views between Pope Leo and Peter Thiel, who is a huge Silicon Valley magnate. He's also a Christian, and he believes very strongly in AI. And according to Ricky Schlott, writing in the New York Post, he theorizes as a Christian about the Antichrist that is referenced in the New Testament. And he sees, if I could find her exact wording, that he's envisioning a techno utopia in which technology is going to be the thing that brings humanity to its apex. And religious opposition to that he sees as a manifestation of the Antichrist. Now, what she's quoting was things he said before the Pope's encyclical, so he's not directly responding to that. But he also regards himself, besides being a Christian, as a transhumanist. And she describes that as something that Silicon Valley execs, many of them are enthusiastic about, insisting that man and machine must merge to become cyborgs to reach our full potential. And Peter Thiel says, we want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind and change your whole body and to transform your whole self. Uh, he says that transhumanism aligns with Judeo Christian inspiration. It is about transcending nature, it is about overcoming things. People are fallen. You are supposed to transcend that and overcome that. Well, the Pope deals directly with transhumanism and what he calls posthumanism. Uh, and he describes them as a futuristic vision of an enhanced human being or human machine hybrid. And he talks about transhumanism as the aspiration to transcend the limits of the human condition, the enhancement of human beings through technology, biomedicine, body engineering, devices, and algorithms with the aim of increasing performance and capabilities. Posthumanism, he says, especially in its more radical forms, goes further and envisions a hybridization of human beings, machines, and the environment, even anticipating a threshold where humanity surpasses itself in a new evolutionary stage. And then he goes into the dangers of that. If the human being is treated as something to be perfected or surpassed, it becomes easier to accept that some lives are less useful, less desirable, or less worthy. In the name of progress, necessary sacrifices may begin to be justified, placing the burden on the most vulnerable in pursuit of the supposed optimization of the species. Well, those of us who for years have been involved in the pro life movement are very familiar with this. From the beginning of the abortion culture, doing away with people born with disabilities was the solution to those disabilities, what I call destroying the victim rather than the cause of human suffering. Well, now we have another column in the New York Post, this by Kirsten Fleming. Prenatal tests drive 90% abort rate. Kids with Downs vanishing. Well, this we heard about it. It's been going on for years, but about 10 years ago, Iceland, CBS News did a big feature on how Iceland was proclaiming that they had done away with Down syndrome. But what they had done away with was Down syndrome children using prenatal testing to identify the possibility of a child being born with Down syndrome and aborting them there at almost 100% rate. Here now, we're talking about a 90% rate. This is just what the Pope is talking about. AI can make this even more universal, finding more people who are going to be, in the view of society, more of a burden and certainly going to hold us back from this scientific perfection. And this is the point. She also makes the point that the church is accused of being anti science, and we've heard this, but what the church is, and St. John Paul talked about this constantly. The church is very much in favor, very active in science, but it insists that science has to have a moral component, that it has to be guided by certain standards of morality, that we don't do something just because we can. We measure whether doing it is good or bad for humanity and the culture. And that's his point. He's not saying AI is going to lead to this, but absent any moral compunction, it very well could.
So the Pope makes a profound statement. He makes many, almost an uncountable number of profound statements in this letter. And one of them says something along the following lines, that humanity doesn't succeed despite suffering and despite limitations. Humanity succeeds through our limitations and through our suffering. I call it, to spiritualize that even further, I refer to it oftentimes as faking out the devil. Just when the negatives are piling up in life, when it feels like um, everything is against you, and you're filled with depression and anxiety, uh, that's an opportunity to flip things. And let me just give you an example from my practice as a clinician. When patients describe to me their symptoms of depression or anxiety or thought disorder, I will point out to them that there's two ways to look at that condition. You can either see it as life is tough, life is so challenging, and gosh darn it, on top of that, I'm vulnerable to depression or anxiety. I am such a victim. Nothing ever goes my way. What's the sense of getting up in the morning? What's the use? Life sucks. Nothing ever works out. But the truth of it is that through this challenge of depression or through this challenge of anxiety, what's really taking place is that the person's healthy side is actually trying to get their attention to let them know that a course has to be corrected, a problem has to be solved, a new vista needs to be broken into. All the truly accomplished people throughout history have been vulnerable to depression and anxiety or a thought disorder, and they learn to flip it. They learn to fake out the devil and use it to promote good, to do miraculous things. So when people who you just quoted are saying that we should be striving for the ability to wipe away all human frailties and all human imperfections, all human vulnerabilities. What he's saying is let's wipe away all human potential. Let's wipe away our potential for greatness. Let's wipe away our potential to be truly godlike and to bring Jesus, again, as I said earlier, to channel Jesus into the everyday.
I think, yeah, the point of trying to perfect humanity and reach the point where only those defined as perfect are allowed to continue to exist, that attitude is one of the greatest imperfections because it refuses to see human beings in their fullness, that all of us have weaknesses and strengths, and we work together to overcome our weaknesses or even to use our weaknesses to grow. And the idea that well, no, the people saying that only the perfect should exist, unless they're suicidal, they're obviously considering themselves perfect.
Yeah.
And in their lack
Yeah.
of empathy and caring for those that they consider imperfect, they're showing us their own serious, serious flaws.
So another concept, like I said at the outset, there was about 14 different concepts. So we talked about the importance of the family, and that if we look at everybody as a brother and sister, or as a as a parent, we can operationalize the concept of collaboration and the, as he calls it, bring it to life, bringing into reality, the civilization of love is the term he used. But another significant portion of the Pope's letter touches on the importance of truth, the importance of pursuing truth, despite how uncomfortable it might be and how strong we need to be to accept the truth. Now, again, if I could hark back to my mental health orientation toward things, and I've talked in prior shows about three levels of mental activity. There's the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. What we humans are great at is knocking out of consciousness, knocking out of awareness, mental material or truth that we find uncomfortable. There are various unhealthy defense mechanisms that are extremely common to humanity to be pushing out of consciousness, out of awareness, what is true. If we are strong enough, if we can get ourselves strong enough to allow ourselves to keep truth in awareness, what humans will do, and I think I may have touched on this in prior shows, is that we will adapt. We will grow. We can't get good at trying to block reality, trying to objective reality, or as the Pope says, to try to construct and manufacture some kind of, he even uses the term fake news, false reality. So I got to tell you another quick little story from my personal life. I had some medical procedures recently, and my doctor, he's a man who I was going to for this care. And I go to the portal, and they point out I shouldn't use the word they in the portal they want to note that my doctor is on vacation for this week. So I sent him a message through the portal, and it's a he, and they don't refer to him as he. They said they are on vacation this week. So I'm like, what, they? What? And but the Pope goes out of his way when talking about the importance of truth to use the phrase he and her, his and she. So he's not pounding people over the head with wake up and smell the coffee kind of stuff, but he makes the point that this kind of denying we're doing of our own personhood, these twistings that we do of reality, he's saying it in a more subtle way, but I think if you read it, you get the point.
The New York State Legislature, you might have heard about this, has just passed legislation that in official, I guess, New York documents, state documents and publications and verbal communication, they will no longer refer to mothers and fathers. Women, parents will be referred to as gestating parents
Okay.
and men as non-gestating parents. Governor Hochul has apparently not yet signed the bill, and some of the Republicans are really trying to make an issue of this, and I hope they do. It's just so absolutely ridiculous, this refusal to deal with reality, this denial of reality. A mother and a father. A father is a male parent, a mother is a female parent, but we want to deny that there are two genders today. So all of this stuff and all
So
of this
crazy.
This woke nonsense that New York's far left legislature gets into because we're such a hard left one party state, and it's embarrassing, really, Jim, to be a New Yorker in
Yeah.
this particular climate.
And we should touch just a little bit on war. The Pope says that war is not inevitable. Only a violent minority, he says, only a violent minority wants war. Humanity does not want war. So he makes a bold statements, and he also says that war is never inevitable. So what you're talking about with people who can intimidate legislators and elected officials, we're talking about, you could say, almost a violent minority who intimidate these politicians to adopt this kind of craziness that causes them to go down the path of denying reality and promoting false realities.
I think some of that's true, but there's also right now in government and in various legislatures, there are true believers in this stuff. Not, some are intimidated.
Yeah.
Oh, they see
Yeah.
this is the way the wind's blowing, especially in my district, so I have to go
Yeah.
along with it. But others are true believers, and the fact that they're getting elected says something, I think, about our electorate these days. That's a whole nother issue. We're in a very fluid time in terms of politics with the ascendancy of populism in both parties. People like Donald Trump and the Republican, Bernie Sanders and AOC and the Democrat. People are just fed up with the establishment, so they're voting for a lot of people who are considered by the mainstream to be very offbeat, but as a result, some of this stuff is just, well, I've had it with the establishment guy, I'm voting for whoever's running against him, and and you get these characters in government.
Just before we run out of time, if you don't mind, Rick, I'd like to just do a quick little plug for my blog, A Catholic Christian and the Everyday. Please check it out. There's essays and stories in there that I think you'll really enjoy, and you'll find them informative and entertaining.
Thank you, Jim. And I'll just mention that, the last two shows, we've had a guest on each show. Coincidentally or not, both of them were named Hinshaw, but they were on my daughter and my brother because they did bring a certain expertise to the topics we were covering. But we want to throw it out there to those of you viewing. If there's a particular topic you'd like to have us address, or If you or somebody you know that you'd like to see on as a guest, we'd certainly like to hear from you. So the best thing is, well, if you go to my email, rick.hinshaw@aol.com, you can just email me with any thoughts or suggestions you have about the show and any possible guests, including yourself, if you'd like to be on. So thank you all for watching. Always a pleasure to have you, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.